Since, oh, there we go. All right, so we're going to be recording this event. I know Allison's got a lot of great things that she's going to inform us on with the environmental justice that's going on at the DEP. And just to kind of introduce, Allison Acevedo is our director of the Office of Environmental Justice from DEP, and we're delighted to have her here today. A lot of people are obviously interested. We've gotten a good turnout today, so thank you all for joining us. I think this virtual session offers an opportunity for a lot of you to participate in this, because I know, in past times at the DEP office, there's only room for, X number of people in their training room. So this is nice to see so many people on the call, and we're really grateful for Allison to be here today. So we'll just go through here. SWEP's mission, just to introduce myself, I always forget to do that. My name is Amanda Love. I work for Moody and Associates, and I am SWEP Three Rivers chair for the 2021 year. And, real excited to be at this event and getting out and about into our in-person events, which will be coming up soon. But SWEP's mission, if you're unaware, we might have some non-members or new folks on the call. Our mission is to provide women environmental professionals a community that recognizes and supports women's leadership and career development, and provides a forum to share new ideas and promote public service within the environmental field. One item, we do have our newsletter that just came out. It's posted up on LinkedIn right now, and it's also on our website if you'd like to check that out. We have been out and about and doing some things during the spring. We did a few stream cleanups and got to get together with some folks. So nice pictures and things in there too, and a recap of our previous conversation with event. So go ahead and check that out. Wanted to thank our annual sponsors at the diamond level. We've got Geosyntech, sapphire level is Arcadis, and ruby level is Moody and Associates. And then also thank you to our board of directors, and specifically our programs committee, for putting together this event today. Upcoming events, just to briefly touch on these, to let you know, we are a sponsor, and we're going to be available at the virtual GBA, Green Building Alliance, Generations of Women Plus in Green, Steadfast and Strong. So that's going to be a nice event. We have sponsored in the past, and we're proud to be a sponsor this year too. And hope that you will, join us there as well. Seems like it's going to be a great event. On June 14th, we have our kickoff for the Summer of Mentoring with Dr. Audrey Morell from University of Pitt. And one thing, if you've ever participated in any of our mentorship programs with Dr. Morell, she breaks down mentorship into multiple, you might think that you have one mentor or somebody that you aspire to be like, or, that is helping you, but really, when you break it down, there are many multiple people in your life that inspire you and mentor you throughout, your career and your life. So this is going to be basically a lunch and learn kickoff to the 9 functions of mentorship, which will come out then each week after. You'll be getting an email if you sign up for that. And then very excited about our Eco District tour and happy hour that's going to be on July 21st. That'll be a nice in-person event. It'll be a walking tour. Really looking forward to that one too. So check out our website if you're interested. A lot of these, are free, or if they're, not free, they're, not too much money. So if you guys want to come and hang out, that would be great. Let's see. Also, we'll go through membership with SWEP. So some of you, like I said, might not be members. It's pretty reasonably priced membership, $50 for an individual, lower in cost if you're from a nonprofit, government, or if you're a student. And then we do have a $200 corporate sponsorship, which includes, different levels of membership. You get basically 5 for the price of 4. And it's a great organization. So I do encourage you, if you haven't, become a member yet, please reach out to Lauren Turpak. She is our membership director, and she can help you out with that. Or log on to our website. Alrighty. Whoops. So with that, I will be turning it over to Amanda Schumacher from our programs committee. She's going to be leading our discussions today with Allison. And again, Allison, we're grateful to have you. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Allison and Amanda, and I will pull up Allison's slides here.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. Thanks for the introduction and the housekeeping items and all that great information about SWEP membership. As Amanda mentioned, we are very excited to have Allison with us here today. Allison Acevedo is the Director of the Office of Environmental Justice at the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, or DEP, and where she works to ensure fair treatment and meaningful involvement by community residents in development of environmental laws, policies, and practices, and that justice and equality are integrated into state policies and practices regarding the environment. Allison has a long history of engaging communities and promoting social and environmental justice, and in past roles, she has been a strategic planning consultant and an attorney for the U.S. Department of Labor, a consultant to the environmental and other nonprofit organizations, the Director of Education of the United Way of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey, and a staff advisor to Pennsylvania Representative Curtis Thomas and Pennsylvania Senator Allison Schwartz. She co-founded the Philadelphia Black Giving Circle and is a member of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Early Childhood Coalition. I do want to just clarify, though, that she is the director for the Western region. So that's why we have her speaking for the Three Rivers chapter. And she also grew up in the Homewood Brushton neighborhood of Pittsburgh, but although currently resides in the Philadelphia area, and she received her Bachelor of Arts from Swarthmore College and a Juris Doctor and Master of Laws in Taxation from Temple University Beasley School of Law. So great qualifications here. We are very excited to have you, Allison. And I did forget to introduce myself, though. I'm Amanda Schumacher with Bort & Lawson. So I will now hand it over to you, Allison, and thank you so much. Looking forward to the presentation, and we'll come back on for questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for the introduction. And really, thank you for the opportunity to talk about environmental justice. I want to clarify before I start that I'm the director for the state, but am working in Western Pennsylvania now because we don't have an EJ director coordinator in Western Pennsylvania. So just wanted to clarify that as well. But I'm really excited to talk about EJ today with folks that are interested in learning more. So if we can go to the next slide for the first one. So this talks about the definition of environmental justice. So one of the things hopefully you'll come away with today in this short presentation is understanding kind of what environmental justice is. We don't actually have a definition for environmental justice in Pennsylvania. We have this policy, but the policy doesn't really define environmental justice. So I want to come away with a definition of environmental justice and understanding what the components of EJ are, and really thinking about the roots of environmental justice in social justice, race, and other advocacy components, and thinking about what happens at DEP. So with this presentation, we'll get some sense of what environmental justice is at DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, and then what the direction of the department is now and moving forward. So hopefully all these things in this brief presentation. But first, the definition of environmental justice. So the definition of environmental justice typically is referencing the US EPA definition that talks about fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, in the development and implementation of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So that means that people are able to be engaged and involved in how we make laws and regulations and our policies in government, and be able to do that in a way that one group of folks doesn't get preference over another group of folks because they're not able to access information or they don't have income or resources to get technical assistance. But PA DEP, now we don't have a definition, but we embody certain principles. Environmental justice embodies the principle that communities and populations should not be disproportionately exposed to adverse environmental impacts. So those are really key terms. And this information comes from a working group report that was prepared in 2001 that sets out environmental justice foundations for Pennsylvania. But really, the foundational piece here is really thinking about how we protect and support communities that have been exposed to adverse environmental impacts. And then other definitions of EJ and principles of EJ have popped up in places like the Principles of Environmental Justice in the 90s, the first People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. And on the bottom below are the elements of the taxonomy of environmental justice. So environmental justice includes all of these components: distributive justice, procedural justice, corrective justice, social justice, and structural justice. So environmental justice, while it relates to the environment, has a lot of components and elements of social and other types of justice, but justice is really a core principle in EJ. So next slide. The next slide really talks about equity, equality, and justice. And this is not just proprietary to DEP or agencies, really looking at environmental justice in terms of getting to the question of justice versus equality and equity. So I'm sure many of you have seen this or some other iteration of this diagram that talks about the difference between equality, equity, and justice getting to the systems change and determining and addressing why a barrier was created, a systemic barrier. Equality gives everybody the same thing, and some folks still are not able to access the outcome you need to access. And then equity gets people the supports they need, but still does not address the underlying concern. So with justice, in theory, we're able to address underlying supports, concerns, issues for the causing the particular barrier so that the barrier is removed. So if we go on to the next slide. This is a timeline of the EJ, general timeline, because some folks say that environmental justice started hundreds of years ago when Native people were fighting for land, for water usage, and for sovereignty over their nations. So in the modern EJ movement, it's traced to the civil rights movement and environmental movements of the 70s. And the most prominent is the Warren County, North Carolina PCB protest, which the term environmental justice was used by lots and lots, hundreds of people. It was a protest on the national level, and folks came to realize the terms environmental justice and think about terms like environmental racism, environmental injustice. And again, you'll see the first People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit referenced in 1991, and look at the items in red. Those are the historical events focusing on PA actions and initiatives around environmental justice. We'll talk more about this in a slide specific to PA history, but it starts in the 90s with community advocacy. And you can see, and this is within the government, because there are so many things that happen around environmental justice in communities that may not be captured because they may not have been recorded in the same way. So in the 90s, the Chester Environmental Partnership worked with DEP, EPA to develop a risk study that showed the environmental hazards and conditions in Chester. And as a result of a lawsuit, which we'll go over again, there was the environmental justice work group formed to really look at environmental justice in PA. our office started in 2002. The public participation policy, which we'll talk more about, was established in 2004. So it was really a innovative policy when we established it in 2004, because it really talked about environmental justice in a tangible way and expanded public participation and public engagement. At this point, our EJ policy is in the first generation. So other states have moved forward to create more innovative and expansive EJ policies. But you can see moving forward to the 2000s that California had environmental justice statutes passed. CalEnviroScreen was proposed and is in version 4.0 being discussed now, which is a mapping tool around environmental justice. 2019, Washington developed a health disparities in environmental, not called environmental justice, but used for environmental justice map. The key piece here is the New Jersey legislation passed in September, I think it was September of 2020, which says that you can consider cumulative impacts, which are cumulative effects on communities regarding the health and environment, environmental health and the environment when making permit decisions. So at this point in PA, we're not able to consider cumulative impacts for communities on communities in the permit process. We can get more information, but are not able to stop a permit process because of cumulative impacts. In New Jersey, that is possible now with this new legislation, this bill that was passed in 2020. So it's a vanguard bill around environmental justice. And in 2021, the federal government is developing and has developed a number of initiatives, many outlined in Executive Order 14008 and 13985, which focuses on equity, but 14008 focuses on climate and environmental justice. It establishes a Justice 40 initiative where 40% of the benefits of federal investments would go to environmental justice communities or communities that are targeted to be priority communities. There's a creation of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council above the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council that also exists, but one at the White House level, really solidifying the interagency environmental justice working group and council at that level. And there are funds being released even now, $100 million released around air quality and environmental justice that may support environmental justice communities. So EPA is doing a tremendous amount around EJ. So that's the broad timeline of EJ. If we can go to the next slide. And this gets to drill down in some of the historical roots of environmental justice to show the components of what some of that is. So in most of these environmental justice movements started, as you can see, or may gather from some of the photos, with people of color traditionally trying to address inequitable environmental conditions and environmental protection and environmental services in their communities, and was grounded in the civil rights movement. So the Warren County I mentioned, the United Church of Christ study was a study that connected the pollutants to people in environmental justice frontline communities and showed the disproportionate impact of industry pollution in certain communities. We talked about the first People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. And the first executive order was Executive Order 12898 in 1994, signed by President Clinton, which really talked about this environmental justice, a basic framework that, not so basic, but a framework that is a little simpler than it is today, that creates the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council and the Interagency Council and calls for some planning around environmental justice. So those are the roots of it. But again, the roots are in the civil rights struggles, typically with people of color around addressing injustice in environmental conditions, permitting services and things like that. Move to the next slide, please. And this is one component of some of the historical legacy of environmental justice. So redlining is a practice where the government would decide where to build homes or to build developments based on often race and often income, and really directing folks of mostly many times people of color to places that are deemed hazardous. So this redlining practice formed the foundation of the current situation, and we can see with current maps that overlay redlined areas with current environmental conditions. And you can see in communities that are, we call EJ communities, our EJ communities are 30% people of color and 20% low income, but you can see that the impacts of redlining still present environmental harms and hazards to many communities of color. So this is a map of Pittsburgh with surveyor descriptions of red line areas in the 1930s. So I'm from Homewood, as was mentioned before, and I went and looked at my area because there's a redlining map. The Mapping and Equality Project, which is comprised of historians, actually looked at redlining maps and showed how folks were driven to communities that were in hazardous spaces because of race and because of income in some cases. So when I looked at the map for Homewood, it said that the community, that the Negroes and undesirables were directed to this community, which was hazardous. So this redlining can be the foundation for industry being located in certain communities, certain health hazards, certain conditions that housing conditions, housing infrastructure that still exists today. But this is a map of Pittsburgh, and you can see the red areas. And just note the notes from the surveyor that talking about odors and noises from local industries, and I'm reading verbatim: infiltration of colored and Orientals, predominance of older cheap cottages zoned for industry. So those are some of the locations where people of color were being directed in the 30s. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we talked about in the definition, in some definitions of environmental justice, and the principle, at least in Pennsylvania, is this disproportionate environmental impact. So the environmental conditions are based on the built environment, the natural environment, and the social environment. And oftentimes, when these conditions are hazardous, they result in a force multiplier to advance environmental injustice. So people who are living close to pollution sources and have to deal with heat waves or natural conditions and pandemics and things like that. And then the social environment, like health disparities, all work together to multiply environmental injustice. So when we think of environmental justice, we have to look at all of these factors as components of the environment. So the environment isn't just the weather or isn't just industry, it's the built environment, the natural environment, as well as the social environment. Next slide. So in PA, our roots in EJ, as I mentioned before, are in Chester in the early 90s. And I mentioned that EPA conducted an environmental risk study. I was on the phone today with somebody in EPA who was around in the 90s and said that there were 11 industry polluters of different types. And this is what the person who was around in 90 said that there were 11 industries in Delaware, in Chester. No, 11 industries in Delaware County, the county where Chester is located, and 9 were located in Chester. 9 of these polluting industries were located in Chester. And he also said that Chester at that time in the 90s had 13% of the population and like 80 to 90% of the facilities located in that community. So the Chester residents concerned for quality living, or Circle, filed a lawsuit against DEP in 1996, alleging violations of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which says that you cannot discriminate against someone based on race, income, or national origin using federal dollars, because DEP received federal dollars to fund its programs. The Chester residents alleged that the dollars were used to produce more facilities or permit more facilities in that community, and it was discriminatory. The lawsuit eventually was stopped because of a procedural matter regarding the permit, but prompted DEP to really think about where we stood with environmental justice. We created a work group in 1999, releasing a report in 2001, laying out a blueprint for environmental justice and creating this office, creating other mandates around EJ, even thinking about looking at permits with the cumulative impacts lens, which has not happened yet because it will take a law to do that in PA as it did in New Jersey, but laying out some of those things. And our office was established after the report was released in 2002, called the Office of Environmental Advocate, and before the Office of Environmental Justice. So if you could go to the next page or next slide. And this is just a broad mission of DEP, really thinking about, it really focuses on protecting air, land, and water, protecting the environment from pollution, and providing for health and safety of citizens. So it talks about protecting the environment, but also importantly, talks about collaborating and DEP working with other partners to prevent pollution and restore natural resources. So we have a strong role as a collaborator. And the next slide, if you go to that, focuses on Office of Environmental Justice goals, again, laid out in that OEJ working group report in 2001, talks about minimizing adverse environmental impacts, empowering communities, and fostering economic opportunities. So folks are like, some folks ask, well, why are you focusing on economic opportunities? And thinking back to the redlining practices where housing was tied to the environment, where housing was tied to community development, thinking about responsible economic development is really critical to address some of the barriers and challenges created around redlining practices. So many communities that have faced continuous redlining, community disinvestment, have a really serious need around economic development and economic opportunity, but doing it in a sustainable way. And the other part is empowering communities, which we're continuously learning how to do better. We help empower communities, communities empower themselves, but ensuring folks have a meaningful involvement and just access to resources to have a voice in the process. And then minimizing adverse environmental impacts is extremely challenging. The others are challenging too. This one is really challenging. Think about how communities are not, again, that term, disproportionately burdened or impacted with environmental impacts. And much of that is rooted in thinking about getting data to establish how communities are impacted, and then working to weave programs to redesign resource allocation to address the outcomes you see in that data. We're just starting to get to that process and refining our mapping to do that. So next slide. In the office, as I mentioned, so the Office of Environmental Justice was created and centered around this environmental justice public participation policy. And again, it was a revolutionary, innovative policy in 2004, which is when it was established, if you remember from the original timeline. The framing of the Office of Environmental Justice is to focus on public participation in the permit process. So the office, along with our office, worked with the department program heads to establish these permits called trigger permits. And those are permits that either as a result of environmental health issues or environmental issues generally have been established to likely be significant for communities. So they're in areas like waste, clean water, then we have waste, clean water, also some around mining, a few around mining. We do not have currently oil and gas, just because of the timeliness of the permits in this trigger permit process, which people have raised some questions about. But the trigger permits broadly get you to a place where our office is involved and participates in getting additional access and information to communities. So there's a permit identified as trigger permit. We meet with community organizations and residents to get information about the permit out to communities, about the permit process out to communities, and listen to communities to see if they need any additional help accessing information. So that's the landscape of trigger permits. And then we have opt-in permits, and folks can opt in to permits not in that are not identified as trigger permits. And we describe, and this is just in Pennsylvania, the federal government does not have a definition for EJ. We describe environmental justice as areas of 30% people of color and 20% low income. And then we have an area of concern around these EJ areas of a half-mile buffer. So our environmental justice areas, about 29%, almost 30% of the population of PA is in an EJ area based on that 30-20 rule. And it includes rural and urban areas. So there are rural and urban areas in EJ areas. And we are, if we can go to the next slide. Oh, before you go to the next slide, can you go back to that one? The map on the right is the EJ areas viewer. So you, environmental justice areas viewer, you can use that map to determine if an area or an address or a city is in an environmental justice area. So you can see there the environmental justice areas and the buffer areas are outlined, but they look like spots on the map. But if you go in and actually put an address in the EJ areas viewer, you can see if a community is in an EJ area. So if you go to the next slide, please. And this talks about a policy update. We are updating the policy for several reasons. So we realized that when we developed this policy in 2001, that it speaks to only public participation. And we've realized that we need to speak to more than public participation in the policy in other areas where environmental justice is prevalent. Plus, we started a process and then withdrew the revised policy because it really focused still on public participation. And we want to think about areas like grant making, establishing an interagency council in DEP around environmental justice to coordinate EJ work among agencies. So we have an informal group now focusing on environmental justice planning and also on grant making and equity in grant making, not specifically EJ, but equity in grant making. So the grant making, environmental justice environmental justice interagency council, really thinking about really clarifying our public participation, making sure that it works in a time where we're using social media and looks a little different in 2004 than things do now, thinking about whether or not we can apply environmental justice to prioritizing inspections in the enforcement space. Also thinking about how we do training around environmental justice and laying that out, and accountability for reporting on what we do around environmental justice. So we're working on annual reports now for 2019 and 2020, but want to think about how to mandate that on a consistent basis. So the EJ policy, without taking us to a point where we can say we're looking at cumulative impacts, we want to see how much we can do. We want to look at refining perhaps the EJ area criteria beyond 30-20 to reflect some of the same concerns, but really broadly, if we're using the EJ information, which we do in environmental justice, this environmental justice term and other grant areas, we want to think about refining it to show other indicators around environmental justice, like other demographic indicators, like age, also like English language learner status, other environmental indicators like the traffic like proximity to polluting resources, polluting sources. So things like that. So really thinking about broadening the criteria to have additional layers considered and to be able to be analyzed to allocate resources, because the EJ policy is used across agencies. So just thinking about the phases there, we started off with the planning phase. We had 2 outreach sessions before we even started drafting things for our communities and outreach engagement, which we're kind of in now. We have an environmental justice advisory board where we engage them around considering the policy and what changes we should have and what we should do with the policy. And then later in the spring and in the fall and through the end of 2021, we're going to be drafting and finalizing the policy and implementing it in the spring of 2022. So incorporated in the process is ability to get comments. So we'll get public comments, hopefully in the fall, around the environmental justice policy. And then we will also have a hearing, hopefully in the fall of 2021, to hear from folks about what we should be doing with the policy. Again, we're starting with that public participation, but want to think about a broader scope for the EJ policy. You can go to the next slide. And one of the pieces that we realize is critical to our work and to the policy is community engagement. So just we're realizing and we're working with EJAB. We've established with EJAB, the Environmental Justice Advisory Board is EJAB, a public participation subcommittee. And they've been weighing in on things that happen in government. So we want to think about how we become, as we work towards that DEP mission of partnering with folks, how we become partners with people in some of the processes that we do. So it's not all created by the time we engage community. So we recognize the benefits of community engagement and are attempting to be more intentional about informing communities when engagement opportunities happen, and we can listen, retain feedback, and then to some extent incorporate the feedback into some of the things that we're doing. But just wanted to highlight some of the benefits from us around community engagement. We learn local knowledge, experience, and history, which is invaluable when we're working with either the permit process, grant making, anything. To understand the community needs means that more communities will be engaged when we're trying to do something and advance initiatives. Minimizes delays in permitting and engagement, permitting and regulatory process, and addressing concerns that may be outside the scope of environmental regulations. So we're able to work with communities to think about things broadly, particularly because we have the Interagency Council. The Interagency Council, we had a discussion from one of our communities in South Central about trees and the planting of trees, and we're able to connect that group with folks at DCNR who have now they're developing a tree equity specialist, but able to connect with DCNR for planning in their community. But that's just a small example of how we can cross coordinate it throughout agencies. And developing relationships with future partners is a critical key to the benefit of the community engagement. And building relationships, again, will make our initiatives we're able to get input on initiatives, but then also things that we want to advance in the future as a department. We'll have partners and ambassadors to support work that particularly work that is beneficial to communities and provides resources. Next slide, please. And just wanted to talk about some EJ tools. So we had that EJ areas viewer, which was that map. And we have the EJ screen is EPA's environmental justice tool. So it uses environmental indicators and demographic indicators to look at areas of greatest need and concern, and just provides data around environmental and demographic indicators in a format that folks can percentiles, look at the percentiles of these indicators for review for communities, but it's a very useful tool. Go to the next slide. And there are other tools in other states like Cal EnviroScreen, just talking about how we advance environmental justice as we move forward. The key in our office and what we're trying to do and have been working towards, in addition to the policies, to really think about how we build infrastructure around EJ across DEP and other agencies. And that's something that, while it's within government, we hope to collaborate broadly to think about how we do that, but building infrastructure so that we can have a place for permits, for grant consideration, for education around environmental justice is really critical. So we've been working across DEP with other agencies, so run environmental literacy council and things like that to ensure EJ is incorporated into these processes and enable internally at DEP and then externally to help develop an understanding of the relevance of EJ across sectors and the EJ history and impact of environmental racism. So really just talking about EJ environmental justice sitting in the environment, but just impacting things like housing, impacting things like health, impacting things like community development. So really thinking about environmental justice in broad scope. There are many, we've gone to communities and we've done roundtables the past 3 years, and we leave it up to communities to define their environmental justice issue. And some communities say that their issue is e-waste. We've had communities say it was e-waste. We have some communities said that their environmental justice issue is environmental education. So that we've worked with them to strengthen environmental education and connect them to PDE, Pennsylvania Department of Education. Other communities say it's blight. So it's a mixture of economic development and environmental issues. So we've enabled that community to get a small communities grant. So we work with our other program area, environmental cleanup in brownfields, to move economic development. So it's really interesting to hear that EJ is across sectors, and important to know the EJ history and impact of environmental racism to underscore the importance of civil rights movements and advocacy, and really advocacy around the environment. And then the history of race and racism is really critical to know those barriers so we can understand what we need to do to address some of the issues and things that we need to study, like redlining, like environmental impacts and disproportionate impact. And then strengthening the EJ stakeholder engagement, going back to building relationships with communities to help advance our broader mission around providing a quality environment, and then advancing partnerships across organizations as well is critical for us to just be able to do our work and do it well. The next slide, which I think is the last one. So this is our office, and I am kind of supporting the Western region. We're in the process of considering the hiring process for a Western regional coordinator for environmental justice, but we have a central region coordinator and an Eastern region coordinator, as well as myself, and I'm the director. And then John Brickell also helps with the Western region as well. So that is the overview, and feel free to ask any questions.
Thanks so much, Allison. We really appreciate that background and that great kind of overview, as you mentioned. It's now open for questions. Does anybody have anything that they'd like? Yeah, you can actually just unmute yourself and ask the question. You can come on camera if you'd like.
Hi, Allison. Thank you very much for this presentation. This was really informative. My name is Amanda McNally. I'm an engineer with Geosyntech Consultants. The question I had was, I noticed in recent permit applications on the general information form, it asked about whether our project is located in an EJ area. And we use some of the tools you mentioned here to check that box, yes or no. Is there guidance that we can give to our clients to start kind of making them aware of what actions may be required or expected, or different type of engagement opportunities if they do have a project that is in an EJ area?
Yeah, so part of what we want to do, we have the EJ policy now. So part of what we want to do with the new EJ policy, so if you look on the slide, there's like a last piece that has marketing and communications and education. So next year, because I think we want to make sure that people are grounded in the new policy, because it has tentacles beyond just the permitting space, but we want to give guidance around the policy in a like framework, like communicate both to our industry partners, to community partners, to internally to DEP. And that's like a process that we're thinking through, because we realize even within the agency, we have education to do. So that's like that really is a critical piece of it. But if you have any ideas, please feel free. My email is there, alacevedo@pa.gov. I'll also put it in the chat, and then everybody can have this presentation. But also just like let us know. We'd be happy to meet and take ideas about how best to communicate guidance to industry. And again, some of the challenges are that it's all voluntary. We're not at a place like New Jersey, but the current secretary is really an advocate for environmental justice and moving environmental justice forward.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it seems like with some of the engagement options you mentioned, it can be very subjective based on what needs are identified. And I know from our client perspective, having budgets and numbers in front of them is very, very important. So kind of trying to bound what they need to do from beginning, and also knowing that it's an evolving process is helpful.
Yeah, and we can lay something out or develop a tool for industry, a tool for communities. So a document, not a tool, a document for communities, a document for industry to lay out that process. So we've done that with municipalities, walking them through the Act 2 process, and work with our ECB program areas to develop something. But we can certainly develop a tool for industries, but would love to have some guidance around what that is.
Thank you.
And somebody asked about the difference between EJ and rural and urban communities, or unique challenges to rural communities. One of the challenges, at least in Pennsylvania, in rural communities, that is economic development. So many rural communities have moved from industry like coal to not having as a robust coal industry. So really thinking about economic development. So the community that we mentioned in North Central and Shamokin, they have a lot of, at one point, I think, several times more population. I don't want to be incorrect, but, and changed as a result of industry changing. So one of the things that they're like laser focused on is economic development and blight and property development. So that's one of the challenges. In some other communities, there's just the same number of properties, but a different number of people now, and really thinking about development in those areas. So that's one of the challenges. Transportation is always another major issue about in rural communities, and not having any, like some places have no transportation. And when we're thinking about how we improve the environment, if folks are not able to get from place to place or participate in the environment or participate in things unless you have a car, the economy coupled with some transportation challenges are often an issue, even though people intrinsically don't think, oh, well, this is an environmental issue.
And I see that Lydia had a question related to rural communities. Lydia, did that answer some of your questions in terms of the unique challenges?
It did. Thank you, Allison. And just Allison, any advice for doing some grassroots kind of work?
So just general advice for doing grassroots work is really to listen to communities. Like I have to work on just have to work on thinking about how as government we engage people, and how as like industry or private industry engaging people. Oftentimes, and this is the way I was taught in the 90s when I was kind of starting to do some community engagement work, that you kind of do the thing and then people would be involved in focus groups. And some of the nonprofits I work for, not all the nonprofits like this, but that folks get involved after the process is created in these focus groups to inform what you've done. They're really thinking about how to build relationships and also to involve people in the process and not just like the product after it's done, and having people feel like they're buying into what's happening is really critical. And it's the thing is this stuff, it takes a long time. Like a lot of time people in the office are like, well, we need this done right away. We need to get 10 people here. And it's like, well, people don't even know who I am. They're not even going to answer my email. Like, who's Allison? So it doesn't matter like who you are or what you're doing. It's just basic relationship building is really critical.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Any additional questions? So I'll round it out. I actually had one, and I know you outlined and talked about several barriers here, but what would you see as the most significant opposition that you face with this? Yeah.
To what?
Just with the movement and the awareness of the EJ movement, and just getting you're talking about working with multiple stakeholders and getting more stakeholder buy-in. I mean, in terms of like those, you had some outcomes and some moving forward items. I mean, for those which.
I understand. So I would say that one of the challenges is really thinking that this is something that is important to the work that is done every day. So really thinking about environmental justice as a core part of the work. So ideally, there should not be an Office of Environmental Justice. That environmental justice should be incorporated into work that happens in equity issues as well every day. So it's a culture shift. So that's very difficult. So it's simpler, I think, to tell people to do X, to do Y, do Z, but then to talk about things that are not required and asking people to do them, it often involves a culture shift to have people think about why they need to do it and what they're remedying and why it's important. So just building that shift or steering a culture shift around the importance of environmental justice and equity and justice in much of the environmental space is the biggest challenge.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate all the questions. Obviously, Allison's information is there on the screen that you can reach out afterwards with any additional questions. Amanda, Love, did you want to say anything to close us out here?
I'll just pop back on briefly and just want to say, again, thank you to Allison for, joining us. That was a great presentation. Definitely, we've got a lot of catching up to do in the environmental justice realm, and sounds like you're doing some really great work there, and real interesting for us all to hear it too. And thank you everybody for joining us today, and to Amanda Schumacher and the programs committee for putting on this presentation as well. So that's about all I've got, guys.
Thank you for the opportunity to present.
Yes. No, we really enjoyed it. Thank you. All right, guys. Well, I guess we're right at 1 o'clock here, so we don't have really too much time for networking, but looks like some people are dropping off already. So this will conclude our event. And again, thank you so much, Allison.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Everyone.
Bye.